In the mid-1860s, the United States emerged from the Civil War exhausted and divided, but still watched by the world. In France, a group of thinkers and political reformers looked across the Atlantic and saw something worth honoring, a republic that had survived its hardest test. They floated a bold idea, a giant monument to liberty, offered as a sign of friendship and shared values. It sounded simple. It was not. At first, the plan lived mostly in speeches, letters, and sketches. It had no construction schedule, no site, and no clear price tag that Americans could react to. In France, supporters imagined a grand symbol that would praise American freedom while also nudging their own country toward democratic ideals. But on the American side, there was no committee ready to organize, no national campaign, no system to raise money. It existed as an idea people admired from a distance. That distance mattered. Without a fundraising machine in the United States, the proposal had no momentum, and momentum was everything. It was easy to celebrate liberty in principle. It was much harder to build a monument in reality. In these early years, nothing forced Americans to choose. No bill arrived, no deadline loomed, no public fight erupted. The project remained fragile because it depended on enthusiasm that had not yet been tested. In the 1870s, the Liberty Monument stopped being a pleasant idea and became a schedule, a budget, and a set of promises. French organizers moved from talk to action and committed to building the statue itself. That decision sounded generous, but it came with a condition that changed everything. The United States had to provide the base, not the island, not the location, the pedestal, and that meant real money, fast. This was not a small add-on. The pedestal was a major construction job with stone, labor, engineers, and long-term planning. It had to be strong enough to hold a colossal metal figure and survive harsh weather year after year. France could point to workshops and progress overseas. Americans could not. On the US side, there was no single national fund waiting to be tapped. There was just a bill without an obvious payer. And the moment the plan split in two, the risk split in two as well. France could finish a statue and still end up with nowhere to put it. America could approve the idea in public and still fail to deliver the one part it controlled. The project now depended on fundraising, persuasion, and local commitment, not good intentions. A monument meant to celebrate liberty had turned into a practical test of whether Americans wanted it enough to buy the ground beneath it. Once the deal became clear, the American side faced a simple ask: raise the money for the pedestal. Committees formed and letters went out, but the response never matched the ambition. Donations arrived in pockets, not waves. Outside a few big cities, many people barely followed the plan at all. And for those who did, it sounded like someone else's celebration, with someone else setting the terms. The problem was not just the amount, it was the attitude behind it. To a lot of Americans, the statue felt like a French project that America was expected to pay to display. That rubbed people the wrong way. Some saw it as a luxury when towns needed roads, schools, and jobs. Others simply did not like being pressured into giving. A gift was supposed to be free. This one came with an invoice. So fundraising stayed scattered. A benefit event helped here, a private pledge helped there, but nothing created steady momentum. Each small success also exposed the larger failure. The pedestal still cost far more than local efforts could cover. Organizers had to keep asking, and the public kept hesitating. Without a broad national push, the pedestal money became a slow leak instead of a rising tide. The project moved forward, but it did not feel inevitable. The harder part did not come from engineering, it came from opinion. As the pedestal bill lingered, the monument became a target. Some politicians treated it as a stunt cooked up by rivals, meant to claim credit for liberty without fixing anything at home. Newspapers carried the complaints forward. A project that needed broad goodwill instead pulled people into camps, and that split slowed every new appeal for money. Critics also pushed a simpler argument: priorities. Cities faced poverty, crowded housing, and labour unrest, and many voters asked why donations should go to a giant statue instead of schools, streets, and jobs. The word foreign hovered over the whole plan too. Even supporters had trouble explaining why Americans should pay for a base to hold up a gift they never requested. The pedestal started to sound less like duty and more like waste. And there was a deeper discomfort that money could not solve. The monument promised liberty, but the country still fought over who that promise covered. Reconstruction had faltered. Black Americans faced violence and voting barriers, and women still lacked the ballot. To some observers, a towering symbol of freedom looked awkward, even insulting, when freedom stayed uneven on the ground. The pedestal campaign did not just ask for dollars, it forced a national argument. The pedestal had seemed like the simple part: just money, just masonry, just time. But the donations that trickled in did not match the size of the bill. Committees made promises, then watched the totals stall. Contractors still needed paying, supplies still needed ordering, and the work could not run on optimism. When the cash ran short, the project did not merely slow down, it stopped. That halt changed everything. Up to that point, people could dismiss the argument as talk and politics. Now there was a hard fact on the ground: an unfinished base with no clear way to finish it. Newspapers reported the shortfall. Supporters had to admit the numbers in public. Critics gained a new weapon because the failure no longer sounded theoretical, it sounded like a deadline. And once the idea of failure became believable, it spread fast. If the pedestal could not be completed, the statue had nowhere to stand, no matter how far the French work progressed. New York's bid started to look shaky, even embarrassing. The effort risked turning into a half-built monument to hesitation. For the first time, the unthinkable felt realistic. The Statue of Liberty might never rise in New York at all. In the early 1880s, the pedestal problem did more than slow construction. It made the entire destination feel negotiable. If New York could not raise the money, the logic went, someone else could. That idea attracted opportunists and practical planners alike. Other cities started to test the waters, quietly at first, then more openly. The statue stopped looking inevitable. It started looking available. Those alternatives did not always mean a simple change of address. Some proposals treated the statue like a piece of property that could be traded, sold, or repurposed to fit a different setting. Interests with money imagined a redesigned plan, a new pedestal arrangement, even a different kind of public site that served their needs. Each suggestion carried the same message. If New York hesitated, the project could move on without it. For New York supporters, that threat forced a shift from embarrassment to urgency. They could no longer frame the crisis as a temporary fundraising slump. They had to defend the project itself and the city's claim to it. The argument became blunt. Either New York finished the job, or it lost the monument and the prestige that came with it. The stalled pedestal turned into a deadline, even without an official date. That was when Joseph Pulitzer changed the entire fight. He ran the New York World, a newspaper built for big crowds, not polite insiders. Instead of begging a few rich donors for one huge check, he treated the pedestal like a public test. He turned the paper into the collection box. and he aimed his message at ordinary readers, not committees. Pulitzer asked for small donations from anyone who cared, even if it was just a few cents. Then he made it feel personal. The world printed lists of contributors which rewarded everyday people with public credit. At the same time, it exposed how little the wealthy had done. That pressure mattered. It turned giving into reputation and refusal into embarrassment. The results came fast because the math finally worked. Thousands of small gifts added up to real money, and the project stopped depending on one hesitant millionaire. The pedestal fund climbed day after day in public where everyone could see it. That visibility created momentum. It proved the statue could be finished, and it forced the last holdouts to accept reality. Once the pedestal money finally existed, the project stopped being an argument and became a shipment. The statue left France in pieces, packed into crates like industrial cargo, and crossed the Atlantic with its fate no longer tied to speeches and editorials. In America, it arrived not as a finished symbol, but as a complicated kit. Now the country had to prove it could turn that promise into something real. The crates went to Bedloes Island, a small federal outpost in New York Harbor, because that was where the pedestal waited. But nothing about the next step felt automatic. Workers had to unload, sort, and account for thousands of parts, then put them in the right order with no room for improvisation. Each piece that fit made the earlier doubts harder to defend. The statue began to take up space in the skyline. As assembly continued, the monument changed the conversation just by existing. When the figure rose, section by section, critics could no longer treat it as a distant idea or a fundraising scheme. It became a landmark that ships could see and newspapers could describe in concrete terms. The controversy did not vanish, but it shifted. America had accepted the delivery. Now it had to live with what it had built. After the 1886 dedication, the fight over money and motives did not vanish, but it lost its power. The statue stood there now, and people began to use it in their own ways. What had once sounded like a political argument started to feel like something more personal. Visitors did not need to know the old debates. They only needed a reason to look up and decide what it meant. Then the harbor traffic kept coming. More ships arrived, more families crossed the ocean and entered a country they barely understood. For many of them, the statue became a marker of the moment their lives split into before and after. It did not solve their problems, and it did not promise comfort, but it gave shape to an idea they could carry, arrival, possibility, and a future that felt chosen. Americans who were already there also began to claim it. Teachers, politicians, and newspapers used it as shorthand for national values, even when the reality stayed complicated. Over time, the argument flipped. Instead of asking why anyone built it, people asked how the country could live up to it. The statue's meaning did not stay fixed by its designers. It grew through millions of private interpretations until it felt shared. In the end, the argument faded, but the statue stayed. What once looked like an expensive headache became a simple, lasting image, so familiar that many people forgot it had ever been controversial. The country did not just accept it, it absorbed it. Over time, the pedestal fight, the stalled construction, and the complaints about priorities slipped into the background. That shift mattered because the early resistance had been real. Americans had questioned the cost, mocked the idea, and treated it like somebody else's project. There had been moments when it looked easier to walk away than to finish. Yet once the statue stood in the harbor, the debate changed shape. The question stopped being, was it worth building, and became, what did it mean? By the time people called it a national symbol, the messy start barely registered. The statue's face appeared in textbooks, in news coverage, and in political language until it felt permanent, almost inevitable. That was the final twist of the story. A monument nearly rejected for being too costly and too complicated ended up as one of the clearest, most recognized signs of America.